Okay.
Great. Thanks so much, Derek. And thanks to you all for being here on this lovely, warm September evening. My name is Rachel Mulberry. I'm a housing programs manager with the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. You may have heard of us. We run a variety of programs for landlords, for homeowners, run home repair, new construction of affordable housing. We also have the land bank. So we're a really multi-purpose arm of the city's planning and development department. And I'm here to share a little bit about PHDC's newest program, which is the Rental Improvement Fund, which, as Derek said, is aimed at supporting small landlords in renovating, improving their rental properties in exchange for longer term affordability. So I'm going to go through some slides here. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Great. So just to give you all a sense of what we're going to cover.
Wait 1 second, just before you get started, I want to remind everybody the chat is going to be closed, but we'll have the Q&A tab where you can submit all your questions and everything. And I think Rachel's going to take them at the end. So if you're looking for a place to chime in, it's in the Q&A tab on the Zoom toolbar. Okay, all you.
Thanks. Great. So I'll go over kind of the program, the basics, how it works. A little bit about the intake and construction process, how loan closing works, and especially how the draws, disbursements work. Everybody always wants to know that piece, as well as loan forgiveness and repayment. We will be able to share these slides afterwards with the folks at JUMPstart, so you don't have to take notes furiously here, and happy to take questions, as Derek said. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the Rental Improvement Fund, as I mentioned, is a program of PHDC. We offer loans to small landlords to fund repairs. We have a couple of intertwined goals with this program. One is to improve long-term housing quality of Philadelphia's rental housing, most of which we know is quite old, to lower tenant energy costs and improve tenant health, and to help small landlords, like many of you on the call tonight, maintain compliance with building code and rental regulations, make sure that you can keep their properties in good condition, maintain a rental license, make sure you can get and keep property insurance, all of that. So again, I think this is probably repetition. You all are likely a better trained group than some of the landlords who we do this presentation for more often. So these commonly used terms are probably really familiar to you all. I'm going to be talking about contractors and general contractors. And when I refer to those folks, I mean someone who's properly licensed, who's providing labor and materials for construction and repair work. Also going to talk about scopes of work, which is the list of construction activities, including the project schedule and estimated cost. I'm going to spend a while tonight talking about our requirements around contingencies, which is the amount of money set aside to cover unexpected costs or cost overruns with repair work. It's often, in our case, a percentage of the total project cost. A deposit, funds given up front to begin a contract. Change order is written documentation of changes to the scope of work. Loan draws, the disbursements from the loan. Deferred payment, we are going to talk about that, will mean deferring repayment, so no payments need to be made on a loan. And loan forgiveness is when the loan principal is forgiven and does not need to be repaid at all. So now to get into the nitty-gritty of how the Rental Improvement Fund works. So currently we have 2 loan options on offer. We think that between these 2 products, we can meet a lot of needs for rental properties in Philadelphia. The first, loan option 1, which is here on the left, is a fully forgivable loan. So in some ways it operates like a grant, but it is legally a loan. The maximum loan amount goes up to just under $25,000 with a 10-year term. And I'll talk in a little bit about the requirements for that forgiveness. But if the requirements are met, there's no interest accrued on the loan. And again, it's fully forgivable. There is an early repayment penalty for this loan option for the first 3 years of that 10-year term. So if a property is sold or the loan is paid off, there's that fee for the first 3 years. But after the first 3 years, there's no early repayment penalty. We also have a second loan option, which goes up to a higher amount. It actually goes up to $50,000 per unit, whereas the first is $25,000 per property. So the second loan option is much larger, can cover a larger scope of work. It is, however, a loan for repayment. It's not fully forgivable. And it has a term of 15 years, so a larger amount, but a longer term. And while it's not fully forgivable, there is a 0% interest rate if the affordability requirements are met, which again, I'll go over in just a moment. In the case of this loan option 2, there is, again, repayment is required, but we defer that repayment for the first year, and there's no early repayment penalty. For both loan products, funds must be drawn down within the first 12 months after loan closing. So what that means functionally is that there's really a 12-month window where construction or repair work can happen. And again, in both cases, if the affordability requirements, which are the same across both loan products, if those aren't met, the loans do need to be repaid at 4% interest. There's also a cap of $100,000 per person across, any combination of these two loan products, in part because we have limited funding. We're really trying to make sure that this reaches as many small landlords as possible. And when we think about that $100,000 cap, we're thinking about any sort of combination of ownership type. So that could include some properties that are owned under an individual's name, others that are owned under LLCs. We're really thinking about who the landlord is benefiting from these loans when we think about that $100,000 cap. And you can't combine loans on a single property, right? So for one property, you could either get loan option 1 or loan option 2, but you could not get both on one property. And as I mentioned, this is a program that we're really excited to be offering specifically to small landlords in Philadelphia, who make up the majority of the landlords in the city. So those are folks who own no more than 5 properties, and those properties together can't total more than 15 units. So you could own 5 single-family homes, you could own 5 duplexes, but you could not own one 100-unit multifamily building. We are really trying to prioritize properties that are currently occupied by tenants, but in some cases we do allow for vacant properties to be eligible for loans. So the way that works is that for loan option 1, so that's the forgivable loan up to $25K, unoccupied properties must have an active rental license. And for the $50K loan, it's similar, but we can accept rental licenses that expired within the last 2 years. So what that means is that if your property is vacant, in most cases, to be eligible, you need a rental license. And again, that's because with limited funding, we're really trying to prioritize repairs to properties that are currently occupied so that the tenants who are there can benefit from that improved quality. In addition, because of some requirements from the state who's helping fund this program, for that $50K loan option, units do need to be rented at the point of loan application by tenants who earn under 60% AMI, or if it's a vacant unit, the next tenant who moves in and leases up there would need to earn under 60% of the area median income. And we have those income guidelines on our website. Properties can be eligible if they have building code violations, but we do need all of the properties who receive these loans to be up to code after the repairs are complete. And really importantly, to be eligible, units at properties that are applying for loans need to be rented at the time that folks apply for the loan at or under these maximum rent amounts at the bottom of my screen here. So, if you have a 1-bedroom that you're renting for $1,200 or a 4-bedroom that you're renting for $1,800, that would be absolutely fine. And again, in the case of a vacant unit, we know there's no current tenant, there's no current rent. These caps would apply as soon as those units are leased up after repairs are complete. We enable landlords to use loan proceeds for a really wide variety of repairs. In general, things that address any sort of habitability issue are eligible, as well as improvements that to water and energy efficiency. So that could be things like new heat pumps or water efficient toilets. We also allow any work that makes units more accessible to people with disabilities. And we allow, just to be really clear, we allow both improvements to specific units, like for instance, dealing with mold in one particular bathroom, but also improvements to the building as a whole. So doing roof work or fixing, a porch that's really part of kind of a common area. So a couple of examples of types of work that's eligible includes, asbestos, also things like lead and mold, pest remediation, as well as electrical and plumbing work, putting in fire alarms and sprinklers, especially when those are required by the city for multi-unit properties, heating and cooling upgrades, again, really encouraging folks to put in cooling systems, given the type of heat waves that we've seen, and upgrade to more efficient systems, as well as things like roof repair, structural issues, insulation, windows, doors, all of that is eligible. And I would encourage folks who have questions about really specific repair eligibility to actually email my team afterwards. And in most cases, we would encourage you just to go ahead and put in an application, and we'll consider things on a case-by-case basis. Now I'm going to talk about how loan forgiveness and repayment works. Again, one of the loans is fully forgivable and one does need to be repaid, but at 0% interest. So I'm going to talk about the fully forgivable loan first. Forgiveness starts in the second half of the year of the loan term. So starting in year 6, 20% of the loan is forgiven each year. And we do ask that property owners kind of apply for that eligibility for forgiveness each year. And I'll talk about what kinds of documents we need. And if the affordability requirements are met, all payments are deferred. So again, at no point in the 10-year term does PHDC expect any payment. However, as I mentioned up front, if those affordability requirements are not met, the remaining portion of the loan does need to be repaid at 4% interest. So if that's in year 9, only 20% of the loan principal would be remaining because 80% would have been forgiven already. So only 20% would need to be repaid at 4% interest. Works similarly for the 50K loan, which needs to be repaid at 0% interest. Again, as I mentioned, payment is deferred for the first year while repairs are happening. Repayment begins in year 2. And as long as the affordability requirements are met, that interest rate stays at 0%, which we know cannot be beat. However, if the affordability requirements are not met, similar to the other loan product, the remaining principal needs to be repaid at 4% interest. And in both cases, we can take either a balloon payment or amortized monthly payments for the remainder of the term. So now let's talk about what those affordability requirements are. Some of them are really straightforward and obvious. We require that landlords comply with city fair housing ordinances and existing city regulations for landlords. In order for folks to remain eligible, we also do require that you submit some documentation to us each year. It's just a lease and a copy of your property insurance. So you can make sure that the property still has a base level of insurance. We're also going to look at code violations, make sure there's still a rental license, etc. And the things that we're looking for, and the kind of primary one here that is really the center of this program, is that annual rent increases cannot be more than 3% per year, unless the unit is rented to a housing choice voucher Section 8 holder tenant. So again, that's really the exchange that we're making with landlords, is that we're giving these really preferable loan terms, and in exchange, the rent on the units that have benefited from the repairs can't be raised more than 3% annually in order to qualify for that forgiveness or that really lovely 0% interest rate. In addition, any new code violations that come up after the repairs have been completed need to be corrected within 6 months, right? We want these buildings that the city has put money into to stay in good shape. We also expect landlords to maintain an active rental license. And if the property is transferred or sold, right, similar to other loans that would be mortgages, leaned against the property, we would require repayment at that time. And as I mentioned before, if these requirements are not met, so if the rent is raised more than 3%, or if there's no rental license, or if the property is sold, we would require repayment of the remaining principal at 4% interest. So I see some questions coming in the chat, but I'll wait till the end to answer those. Now I'll talk a little bit about what our application process is like and what you can expect during construction. So we do require that that applicants have really the full packet of materials ready at the moment that they apply. We have an online application portal. Most importantly, we require a scope of work from a licensed contractor at the moment of application, right? So not only do you need to kind of think about what work you want to get done on a property, but you need to go out and get a bid, or ideally more than one bid, from a licensed contractor so that we have a cost estimate to work with. We also have a very straightforward notice to tenant form that both landlords and tenants sign. This is really just letting the tenant know about this loan application, letting them know what kinds of repairs might be done to their unit or that might affect them. We also need to see current leases to make sure that the current rent amounts are below the maximum rent amounts I showed on that earlier slide. Again, this doesn't apply to vacant units. We know that there's no lease in those cases. And as I'll talk about a little later, we do require a contingency. And in cases where landlords are covering that themselves, we would also ask for a bank statement to show that the loan applicant has some funds on hand to start the repair work themselves. As I mentioned, we ask that folks submit all this information online with their application. That way we can do the full review and get back to applicants really quickly with next steps. So now I'll go through, and again, I imagine this is old news to many of you here on this call, given the really excellent training and education that JUMPstart does. But I'll talk very briefly about contractor selection. We do require that all contractors who work on these jobs to be licensed. You can check whether a contractor is licensed both on the L&I website as well as with the state attorney general. We do really strongly suggest that folks get more than one competitive bid. And in some cases, we will ask to see more than one estimate, especially for things like roof work, where we know estimates can really vary across contractors. Unsurprisingly, we also require that folks obtain all of the necessary permits for the work that's going to be done. And I'll go through a little bit, again, old news, I'm sure, for many folks on this call, but some tips about how to navigate the permit process. We do allow borrowers to change contractors at any time during the construction process. We just require that anyone new who's going to be doing work also be licensed. And we know, again, this might be true for folks here tonight, that there are a number of landlords who themselves are licensed contractors, and we do allow people to complete their own repairs on their own buildings. The one exception is that in cases, again, where the property owner is doing their own repairs, we can only cover the cost of materials. We do not cover labor cost for landlords who are doing their own work. For landlords who are paying any other contractor, obviously we're covering, and we allow for both labor and materials. So just to reiterate, we ask that all contractors be licensed, and when we review those initial estimates, we do check for the license numbers. And again, encourage everyone to make sure that contractors you're thinking about working with are reputable and experienced. I'm sure nothing new there. This is just an example of what a scope of work would look like that has all of the kinds of detail that we would ask for, ideally a breakdown between labor and materials, itemized description of the work to be done, an estimated start date, as well as obviously the cost. Here is the notice to tenant form that I mentioned. Again, really just giving the tenant some basic information about the program, asking that the applicant share the proposed repairs and timeline, And this very simple form also describes the terms of the loan, which include that annual rent increase cap of 3%. There's also, I'll talk a little bit more about this. We do also ask that landlords provide at least 3 years of good cause eviction protection, which functionally means that leases for tenants who are currently, in units that are going to be improved, that those leases renew for 3 years, unless the tenant has violated any of the terms of the lease, right? So tenants who don't pay rent or who have caused extensive damage to the property, those would be considered violations of the lease, and this good cause protection would not protect tenants in those cases. This just really, the intention is to allow tenants who have been living in a unit to enjoy the repairs, the improved conditions after the repairs are complete for at least 3 years. But again, this only extends to tenants who have not violated any of the terms of their lease. So once we have received the loan application and reviewed it, assuming we have all the materials, we'll issue a conditional approval and schedule an initial home inspection from one of our PHDC inspectors. We're going to look for things like making sure that the roof is in good condition, or if it needs work, making sure that roof work is part of the estimate. We'll document all of that with photos. And in general, we're just looking to make sure that what's on the estimate matches generally what needs to be done at the property. And one really important note, I'll say this a couple more times, the rental improvement fund loan products cannot cover repairs that were completed prior to when the loan closed, right? So functionally, we're not reimbursing for things that have already happened before you applied for the loan or before we closed the loan. This is really for work that has not yet started. As I mentioned before, construction permits also required under this program. And obviously for all work in the city of Philadelphia, I would really just mostly, I think the takeaway from this slide is for anybody who has questions about permits to go to Philly Permit Navigator to identify the types of permits you might need. In most cases, for many cases, folks will just need an easy permit. But it is important if you're thinking that you will need other types of building permits, especially things like any sort of excavation, etc., to make sure to allow for a couple of months, since the timeline for getting those permits can take a while. Again, easy permits are going to be the most common, and would really just, again, the main takeaway here is to make sure that you're thinking about permits early, that you're thinking about what they're going to cost and including that in your estimate, and allowing time for that. And again, would point folks to the Philly Permit Navigator for more information. I'm going to skip through some of these so we have plenty of time for questions. Just some basic tips here for construction project management. Again, I imagine JUMPstart has gone over this with many of you here tonight in other contexts. For properties that are occupied, great idea to ask tenants, again, to discuss with them what repairs are going to be done, talk with them about the timeline, and work with them to prepare the property for construction. So moving things out of the work area, making sure that again, their personal items are out of the way so that there's no damage. And the main second piece is really just to have open communication, both with the tenants and the contractors, making sure tenants are clear when work is going to happen, and that contractors know, again, what the expectation is around working hours, where they'll take breaks, and using, where possible, kind of making sure everything's written down so that there's a paper trail. Now I'll talk about loan closing and draws. So the closing process, like most loan closings, we require a photo ID. We do also look for property insurance. We ask to be added either as an additional insured or as a mortgagee. And our property insurance requirements are really quite standard. And you can find more about what we require on our website. But again, it's really just a baseline. We're not asking anything more than a kind of standard level of coverage. We do require a sign and lease amendment I'll show in a moment, which really just institutes that 3 years of the lease auto renewal, unless the tenant has violated the terms of the lease. And at loan closing, we do need signatures from everyone who's on the deed. There's some additional documents for properties that are owned under an LLC structure. In that case, we need things like the certificate of organization or the articles of incorporation or corporate resolution documents, etc. Just really things to make sure that the person signing is the authorized signatory. And most of our loans we close at PHDC's office with our in-house notaries. You don't have to go out and do that elsewhere. But for anybody who's not based in Philadelphia, I'm guessing it's less relevant to those here tonight. But loans can be closed elsewhere, and notarized, the originals can be mailed back to PHDC. We do deduct the standard city recording fee from the loan, so applicants don't have to front that recording fee, but that $244. Actually, I think the amount might have gone down slightly in the last few weeks. I'll update these slides, but that amount is taken out of the loan. So a little bit more about that lease amendment that I mentioned. This is very standard, good cause eviction protection. We want to see this in the current, amended to add to the current lease, as well as in future iterations of the lease for at least the first 3 years of the loan term. What that's really doing is allowing the tenant to stay for 3 one-year terms, as long as they haven't violated any of the provisions of the lease by, for example, not paying their rent or causing extensive damage to the property. And it also, again, outlines that rent increase limit of 3% annually. Now I'll talk about how the draw schedule works, and really the main piece to highlight as we start this conversation is that we know for repair projects, costs often increase somewhat unpredictably after the repair work begins. So for that reason, the rental improvement fund requires a 20% contingency. So 20% in addition to the, above the estimated repair costs, be set aside to make sure that cost overruns can be covered, and that we're not, as the lender or as the property owner, in a situation where the required work can't be completed. And so there's 2 ways, again, this applies for both loan products, but there's 2 ways that borrowers can accommodate that required 20% contingency. In the first case, a kind of lower risk option here on the left, that contingency can be built into the loan itself, right? So what that means is that if the total cost of repairs, the estimated cost, is less than $20,800, right, there's room before hitting the maximum loan amount to accommodate that 20%. So we would issue a loan for $24,999, and we know that 20% of that is to cover any cost overruns. Similarly, for the $50K loan, if the total estimated repair costs are under $41,650, we would issue a loan for the loan cap, but know that part of that is to cover that required contingency. The other option is a slightly higher risk option, which involves more reimbursement and less advance, as I'll go over in a moment. But that 20% contingency can be covered by the borrower in cases where their estimated repair costs are really right up against or quite close to the loan max. So there's not room for that 20% within the loan itself. So that means for the $25K forgivable loan, if the total estimated repair costs are more than $20,800, then the applicant would be required to show that they have at least that 20% contingency on hand, and they would have to cover that themselves and use that to start the repair work. Similarly, for the $50K loan, the total estimated repair costs are more than $41,650, then the borrower would be expected to show that they have the 20% on hand and use that to start the work. So the takeaway here is that expect everyone as professionals and property owners to budget carefully and to really think about, given the funds you have on hand, which of these schedules would work best for you, and to think about the repair scope accordingly. So now I'll just give a couple of examples. Here's what a low risk or this kind of advanced draw schedule would look like for the 25K loan. So someone who has only $1,000 of drawings and permits, as an estimated cost, and $18,000 of kind of hard costs, so $19,000 total, right? That's under that $20,800. So that required 20% contingency can be included in the loan total, as you can see here. And this is even slightly under the cap. In contrast, a higher construction cost, it's over that 20,800. There's no room for the full 20% contingency. And so the applicant in this case would be required to show proof that they have on hand at least $4,800. I'm gonna skip through what the other ones look like. Again, we'll share these slides afterwards. And really the practical implication of this is that in the lower risk situation, PHDC is able to provide an upfront deposit at loan closing. And in the higher risk scenario, we don't make an upfront deposit and the borrower has to start the repair work using their own funds. So I'll talk first about how that works for the lower risk, the kind of advanced draw schedule with a deposit. First, we will make a 30% deposit once the loan closes. That can be used to pay contractors to start the work, etc. Then we do an interim inspection once 60% of the work is complete. And at that point, so again, we're looking at work complete. Our inspector, as long as they agree that 60% has been done, will issue an additional 30% of the loan amount. And then we'll do a final inspection once 100% of the work is complete. And at that point, we will issue an additional 30%. So that brings us up to 90% of the loan that's been issued. And we hold back the last 10 only for folks who need to go get a rental license if they don't already have one, or get property insurance if they don't have that. And as soon as we have, so for folks who already have rental licenses and property insurance and, share the receipts of the funds that they've spent, we would issue that last 10% really immediately, And as I mentioned before, all of the draws, all of the repair work has to be done within 12 months of loan closing, which so far we have not found to be an issue at all. Most folks do all of the work within a much, much shorter time frame. So in contrast, on the kind of higher risk side, we're not making a deposit. So borrowers need to use their own funds to start the repair work. And we come back once about 60% of the work has been complete. And we issue a draw for 60% of the loan amount. But really what that means, again, is that the landlord using their own funds needs to be able to get to 60% of work completed. Then we'll come back for a final inspection once 100% of the work is complete, issue an additional 30% of the loan. Again, that brings us to 90%. And we'll make a final draw for folks who immediately for folks who already have a rental license and property insurance. If not, we'll kind of hold back that last 10% until everybody has the paperwork in order. Great, so that final loan draw, as I mentioned, happens after final inspection has been passed. In addition, I should have mentioned, in addition to making sure that you have the rental license and property insurance, we want to make sure that all of the open code violations have been resolved. And if there wasn't already a certificate of occupancy for the property, that's been obtained. And again, we'll be checking a lot of that via public information. We can tell when there's a rental license or a certificate of occupancy, but for things we can't tell, like property insurance, we'll ask for those records. And one thing to note, again, we very, very rarely see this, but in cases where our inspector can't get access to the full property, or we come out thinking 100% of the work has been done and it really hasn't, we do have a $200 reinspection fee just to come back out to do really the same inspection that should have been completed originally. That happens very rarely, but in those exceptions, we do charge $200, and that's removed from the loan. So just to review, and then I see we have a lot of questions in the chat, excited to get to those. So the rental improvement fund is for small landlords, generally for tenant occupied properties, but some eligible vacant units can also be eligible for the program. And we have 2 loan products, one that's fully forgivable up to $25,000, one that's for repayment at 0% interest up to $50,000 per unit. There's 2 different draw schedules, one which includes a deposit, as I talked about, where the repair costs are under either $20,800 for loan option 1, or under $41,650 for loan option 2. Again, we'll share these slides. You don't need to memorize these numbers. Or for cases where the estimated repair cost is higher, is much closer to the loan max, we don't make an initial deposit. We have a reimbursement draw schedule. Couple other things just to remind everyone: contractors must be licensed, tenants must be notified of the repairs using that notice to tenant form that we ask for up front. We do require lease amendments, as I mentioned, with all tenants who are living in units that benefit from repairs. And repairs cannot begin until the loan closes. So this is not a good program if you already rehabbed a property and you're looking to get reimbursed. Unfortunately, we're not the program for you. And you must meet those affordability requirements, primarily limiting annual rent increases to no more than 3% in order to get loan forgiveness or maintain that really nice 0% interest rate. And I think I already went over this piece. This is just really how it works. Because I'll touch on this really briefly. The first step, you all are here, is doing the information session. Then you'll go out and select your contractors. You'll apply. Derek or Sarah can drop the link to our website, which has the apply button in the chat. We'll review the application materials. If everything looks good, we'll issue a contingent approval. We'll do an inspection, which will include a more detailed review of the scope of work to make sure it matches what actually is needed at the property. And we'll close the loan. If you're using the advanced draw schedule, we'll give you a deposit. We'll come back when 60% of the work is complete and issue you a second loan draw. Come back again once all the work is complete, issue that final loan draw. And again, that's similar for the reimbursement draw schedule, except that there's no upfront deposit. And I will stop there. That was a lot of talking.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a ton of information covered very succinctly. So I can tell you've been doing a lot of these presentations, right? So yeah, thank you so much. That was great. And I'll reiterate what Rachel said. The website is really great and has a lot of that info condensed and easy to find. So check out the chat for that link, as well as we'll send out the slides that Rachel went over, and a link to the recording and some other stuff in tomorrow's email, as well as the permit navigator, which I'm glad you mentioned, because that is a great new tool for developers, which I also linked in chat. So Rachel, if it's cool with you, I'll just kind of rapid fire through these questions. Like you said, we have a lot. And if you need any clarification or anything, we can just ask somebody and they'll submit a new question at the end. So going way back to where we started, Koasia is asking, I joined the PHDC webinar and the loan repayment for option 2 was deferred for 2 years. Has that changed? So it sounds like at a previous information session, she might have heard that it was deferred for a different amount of time.
Yeah, so I apologize if that was confusing or not shared as clearly as it could have been. I think no, that hasn't changed. Repayment starts at the beginning of year 2.
Gotcha.
So for the first year, payments start beginning of year 2. Apologies if that wasn't clear in the prior session that you joined.
No worries. All right, next question comes from Eben. They say, is there a minimum length of ownership? So you might have answered that in a different terms, but how long do you have to hold on to the property you're getting improvement for?
So there's not a minimum. Well, I guess I'll answer the question a couple of ways. There's no requirement that folks have owned the property for a certain amount of time before applying for the loan. However, to be eligible for that forgiveness or 0% interest rate, you do need to continue to hold the property for either 10 years or 15 years, depending on the loan option.
Yep. So just to be clear, like if you decide to sell the property at any term before that, you have to pay back the loan in full at that time, right?
Yep.
Gotcha. Great. Next question comes from Kyle, and he says, if I am converting a property from a single family to a duplex, could I be eligible for 2 units in option 2?
Yes. What I would say, Kyle, is that again, this is really for repairs that benefit tenants. So we would not cover the cost of that conversion. I would strongly encourage you to do that single family to duplex conversion and then come to us and apply. We really don't work with folks who are in the middle of converting the number of units at their property.
Yeah, so maybe they apply for Jumpstart for the conversion, right? And then the the improvements with you guys. So I hope that answers your question, Kyle. Next question is 60%, or from Velvet, they say 60% AMI. What is the cutoff income amount? So I know you probably don't know that off the top of your head, but where can people find AMI information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will drop a link in the chat very shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, Velvet. Melissa and Bill have a couple questions about specific types of renovations that might qualify, like cosmetic repairs, like a new kitchen or a bathroom, or installing fences. You mentioned that there's somebody to email specifically with these questions, right?
Yeah, I'll also, along with the income guidelines, I will put our email address and phone number in the chat. In general, and again, we know that every situation is unique, and so happy to talk with folks and kind of think about this on a case-by-case basis. What I would say in general is that we can allow certain cosmetic repairs or things that aren't directly habitability, as long as in general the type of work happening on the property includes habitability or accessibility or efficiency work. So an example I would give is if there's a plumbing leak or a roof that needs to be repaired, and also, the property owner would like to do some upgrades to the kitchen, that would be fine. But we would generally deny applications that are only doing work to a kitchen or trying to put a new laminate flooring over flooring that's more or less fine, right? Like we want the scope to generally include a good amount of work that is really legitimate kind of repair issues that are being addressed.
Removing blight, right? You're not just looking to like increase the value of the property so you can increase your rental amount. It's bringing it from a non-livable state or an favorable state to something that is market value, right? Okay, cool. Thank you for those questions. The next question comes from Anita. She says, "Are owner-occupied multifamily properties eligible?" So I think yes.
The one thing I would say is that we don't cover the cost of repairs that are specifically happening within the owner-occupied portion of the property. So building-wide things like roofing, electrical, facade improvements would be absolutely fine, but we would not pay for the kitchen upgrade within the owner-occupied portion of the property.
Gotcha. The next question comes from Tanya. She says, "If you are the general contractor and the owner of the property, are you still eligible?" So yes, you can be your own GC, right?
Yeah. The one, yes, and being your own GC is absolutely fine. Again, the one thing I mentioned, this is less relevant on the GC side, but we don't cover labor costs for people who are doing their own work at their own property.
Great. And for people who are familiar with Jumpstart's loan, like we can't have a line item that's for contractor overhead or project manager fee or anything. It's for the same reason. Your cost savings is that you're doing the work yourself, right? Not that you're going to get paid double. So the next question from Bruce is, "Can we rent units under Section 8, and do properties have to be in a corporation name or entity name?"
Yeah. Well, I would say units absolutely can be rented under Section 8, and we would strongly encourage that. And I should have mentioned this up front, that 3% annual increase that we've capped does not apply if the unit is rented to a voucher holder or to Section 8 tenant, right? You would apply for rent increases from the housing authority the same way you would normally. PHDC does not get involved in that. We will allow you to rent at whatever rent PHA tells you is allowed. And the second question around being in a corporate name, no. Properties can be under an individual name or under a corporate name. Either is fine.
Awesome. Next question comes from Edward. They say, "My property is vacant and has not been occupied for more than 2 years. Would my property be eligible?"
So, yes, if you have an active rental license. Okay. No, if you don't have an active rental license.
Got it. Next question comes from Bruce. "Can you obtain can you obtain a loan for a property that's already inhabited? We went over this.
Yes.
Yes, you can. Edward Golding says, now, are we allowed to borrow other funds if the PHDC loan does not cover the cost of the entire project? If so, do you want to be in the first lien position? So does that question make sense? Like if the scope is larger, can they apply for the max amount from you guys and the remainder elsewhere?
Yeah, so not really is the answer. In part because we want to guarantee that with our funding, the property is going to be up to code afterwards. And if we're one of multiple funding sources, we can't really guarantee that. I will say that there is some wiggle room. For example, if you're applying for the 25K loan, we generally accept scopes of work that are up to around $30,000, similar for the 50K product. But in general, no, we would not allow someone to apply where our portion of our part of the capital stack is just one of multiple. I will say that we don't have rules about lien position. So we're happy to issue loans on properties that have a first or two mortgages ahead of us. That's fine. But again, we're really looking to do work on properties where our loan product can be covering all of the work that that needs to be done to make the property safe and habitable.
Great. And our next question here, I'm not 100% sure what they're asking. Maybe you're familiar with the whole home repair program funding, or Strawberry Mansion Community Development is asking, is there live information just like this, or any recordings about how homeowners can get started with that program?
Yeah, so I'll speak to the rental side. Actually, the 50K loan product that we offer is funded through whole home repair funding from the state. So this is absolutely an important part of that state funding. I would encourage anybody who has, on the homeowner side, questions about whole home repair and how that money is being used to check out this link on PHDC's website, which will tell you where to start.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from Kwame. Hey Kwame, how's it going? Good evening. If we have a fixed renovation budget that doesn't allow for HVAC, can we apply for a loan to get HVAC installed at the property after the renovation has been completed? So yes. I guess, yeah, okay. So after,
and I would say, again, we're not going to cover the cost of work that's already been done, but right. If you complete a set repair scope or work scope and HVAC was not part of that, you could apply to us once that other work had been done, specifically for the HVAC portion, and that would be fine.
How about and there's no restrictions on further improvements that are done after the renovation with PHDC, right? Like say they use their loan, then decide they want to install HVAC after that. There's no restriction there, right?
That's correct. However, again, we do require that after the repair work is complete, with our loan, that the property is up to code and right. is safe and habitable and has a rental license. So you can't really use our loan to get halfway because we do require that it be habitable.
Right. So you wouldn't be able to start help out with starting the HVAC system, and then I see what you're saying. Got it. All right, next question comes from Bill Underwood. Can the lender be in second position? And you said yes. Second lien position is what I meant. Another question here from Strawberry Mansion. I'm assuming it's ... but I'm assuming it's Community Development Corporation or something. The 3-year clause, does it apply if damage to the property is done after the new renovation or repairs?
So eviction, the protections that are in place they really just cause the lease to be auto renewed if it has not been violated. And that includes, yes, the time after the repairs are complete. So if a tenant 1 or 2 years after the repairs are complete causes sufficient damage to the property that it's considered a breach of the lease, then those protections would not protect that tenant from being evicted.
Gotcha. Kevin's question is, how is the 4% interest calculated? So is that per diem, or is it accruing as you receive the funds?
So we, as long as it's calculated on the remaining principal, and again, we allow for that 0% interest rate, or forgiveness. So it's really calculated at the moment in time when someone violates those affordability provisions. And again, we can allow for either balloon payments or payments that are amortized monthly.
Gotcha. Cool. Next question comes up. Rona says, can I leave without the Q&A? So Rachel, have they met the requirement? Okay, cool. Rona,
Yes.
you're good to go. That's like getting the hall pass before you leave. Next question comes from Velvet. How can we get a copy of this info? We got the website for you. The recording of this is going to be sent out tomorrow, as well as Rachel's slides in an email tomorrow morning. Next question comes from Eunice. Do you have any grants or loan info for those who are looking to start in affordable housing or low income tax housing? I think that acronym is messed up, but low income housing tax credits.
Yeah, so that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. But for those who are interested, PHDC does have a minority developer program, which I can put, I'm putting a link in the chat, and I think Sarah can share it out. And I know that Jumpstart is also really a resource there.
Yep. Next question from Deneen. Are you currently accepting applications if the property is recently vacant, but it does have a rental license? So this is everyone's curious about whether they can get a loan if it's occupied or not.
Deneen, you should go ahead and apply. Yes.
Yes. Rental license is the green light for everybody. Bill Underwood, again, with his question, within 10 years, is the full balance required or remaining balance?
Remaining balance. So for the 10-year loan, the forgivable loan, it starts to be forgiven in year 6. And so if the property is sold or the rent goes up too much after year 6, only the remaining portion of the principal is due.
Okay. Next question is from Anita. If I'm in the process of acquiring a tenant-occupied property, can I apply immediately after the property is in my possession? So I guess
yes, as long as you have the deed. Yep.
Gotcha. Next question is from Ronald. How long does it take for loan approval? So what's that timeline like between when someone applies and between when they receive that first 30% deposit?
Yeah, so we generally try and have a pretty quick turnaround. Again, as long as we've received the complete set of application materials. So that's the big qualification, but as long as we have everything that we need, we can usually do it within a 30 to 45 day turnaround. So not as fast as other places, but not too bad.
Got it. Thank you, Ronald. Next question is from Koasia again. If the property is owner occupied, but it's a 2-bedroom and the owner has a roommate who is a tenant with a lease, can funds be provided to update the owner occupied unit? Okay, that's very specific situation. So
no, so for properties that are owner occupied, it does need to be
separate units, right?
The tenant and the owner portions need to be separate units with separate entrances that are like legally separate units.
And technically they should have a rental license for 2 units, right? All right, our next question is from Desmond. Desmond, I own a house, or that's not a question. He just says he owns a house in Brewerytown and needs help finishing the financing. Reach out via email to either Jumpstart or Rachel, and maybe one of our programs can help you. Next question comes from Luke. Are there post-work inspections? So I guess like during the inspection, and I know we've said this before, but you're reviewing work that's been completed previously, right? You're not like dispersing funds, based on what's going to be completed before the next inspection. Correct,
except again for that upfront 30% deposit. But after that, we're doing an interim inspection once about 60% of the work has been done, and a final inspection once 100% of the work has been done. And again, after that final inspection, we do expect to see receipts. So would encourage everybody who's thinking about applying to make sure that they keep receipts and don't pay in cash in a way that you can't prove later.
Mm-hmm. Next question is from Sandra. Is upgrading the HVAC permitted? An example, presently there are window units and gas heat in a single family residence, and I would like to put in electric central air and heat.
Absolutely. And we would really encourage people to think about adding cooling, like I said, looking into heat pumps, things that generally are going to be more efficient and better both for the tenants' comfort, their energy bills, and better for the property owner long term. Absolutely.
Great. Next question is from Deneen. If you have multiple properties that require repairs, is there a restriction on the number of loans that you can apply for and have open at once?
So the only restriction that exists is that a single landlord cannot get more than $100,000 in loans total across all time. from the rental improvement fund. So functionally, what that means is that probably you couldn't have more than 4 properties with loans unless you're applying for very small loan amounts. But again, you can kind of do the math on how much you'd want to apply for across different properties.
Got it. And our last 2 questions here, one's from Luke. Are there minimum credit requirements from the applicant or landlord, or are there landlord income requirements? So do you guys do any credit or income inquiries?
No, we do not do credit checks, and there's no income requirement. What I will say is that for the 50K loan, which requires repayment, we do look at existing debt on the property to make sure that the property can support an additional loan payment, that would be required by the rental improvement fund. So we are looking to make sure that, again, taking into account the rent and existing debt, that there's a debt service coverage ratio of at least 1.2. Again, that's quite generous. Most properties can do that, but we're not otherwise looking at credit or landlord income.
Got it. All right, and our very last question here, and I know you answered this already, but Paul says, does the property have to be in Philadelphia, or do properties in the surrounding areas qualify?
The property has to be in Philadelphia, yes. I will say that landlords themselves do not have to live in Philadelphia to be eligible, but their properties do.
Got it. All right, well, that is all the time we have, and we got through most, if not all, the questions there. So please, if anybody has any remaining questions, or wants to reach out about their specific property, or even apply for a loan, please reach out to Rachel. She put her email in the chat. I think you did that, or not yet. Let me see.
Yeah, one moment. I will drop our email address and phone number in the chat. I would really encourage everyone to read the website. We have pretty much all of the information you could ever want there, and for questions that aren't answered after you read the website, you can give us a call or email us, and someone on my team will give you a call back or send you an email back.
Great. All right, and Rachel, I think Sarah is resending it to everybody in the group, so it should be all in the chat there now. And like I said, we're going to send out an email with all this, extracurricular information and the recording and everything tomorrow. So look out for that. But otherwise, I think we're all set. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. This was a huge help. I know I definitely understand the program a lot more, even though we've spoken a couple times before this and I thought I understood it. Now I really can say I understood it, and I hope everybody in the call agrees. So really appreciate your time, and hope everybody enjoyed the information.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good night, everybody, and see you in a couple weeks for the next JUMPinar.